This is the true story of 10 people who boarded a ship in New York and vanished somewhere in the Atlantic, leaving behind a seaworthy vessel, 6 months of supplies, and one of maritime history's most enduring mysteries. Almost everything you think you know about the Mary Celeste is probably wrong, and what actually happened is stranger than the fiction that replaced it. December 4th, 1872, 400 miles east of the Azores, and Captain David Morehouse is standing on the deck of the Dei Gratia when something catches his eye. The vessel is a brigantine with 2 masts. She is under sail, but something is deeply wrong. The ship keeps yawing, drifting left, then right, then left again, and there is absolutely no one at the wheel. Morehouse recognizes the ship immediately because he knows her captain, a man named Benjamin Briggs, who left New York 8 days before the Dei Gratia departed. The Mary Celeste should be in Genoa by now, or at least close to it, but instead she is here, drifting aimlessly in the middle of the Atlantic with not a single soul visible on her deck. Morehouse orders his first mate Oliver Deveau to take 2 men and board her, and what they find over the next hour will become one of the most enduring mysteries in maritime history. I am Caleb Redford, and this is the true story. October 1872, Pier 50, East River, New York City, and the Mary Celeste is preparing to sail. The brigantine measures 103 feet, recently refitted, and dock workers are loading her with 1,701 barrels of denatured alcohol bound for Genoa, Italy. Benjamin Spooner Briggs commands this voyage, a 37-year-old captain from a seafaring family in Massachusetts, where his father worked the same trade and most of his brothers went to sea. Everyone who knew Briggs described him the same way: deeply religious, well-respected, experienced, careful. Sarah Briggs joins her husband on this trip, along with their 2-year-old daughter Sophia, and the captain writes to his mother that the vessel is in beautiful trim and he hopes for a fine passage. Their 7-year-old son Arthur stays behind with his grandmother because he has school, and that single decision, keeping a boy home for his education, saves his life. 7 men make up the crew. First mate Albert Richardson, hand-picked by Briggs himself. Second mate Andrew Gilling, 4 German sailors, and the steward Edward Head. November 5th arrives and the Mary Celeste leaves Pier 50, anchoring off Staten Island to wait for better weather. 2 days later she enters the Atlantic, and for the next 2 weeks, nothing unusual appears in the ship's log. The last entry on the log slate carries the date November 25th, 1872, 8 in the morning, placing the Mary Celeste 6 miles off Santa Maria Island in the Azores. A routine entry with no distress, no indication that anything is wrong. And then nothing. December 4th again, and Oliver Deveau climbs aboard the Mary Celeste with 2 crewmen from the Dei Gratia while the ship moves beneath them, still under partial sail, still drifting without purpose. Deveau calls out and gets no answer, so he goes below. Water has come in through open hatches and skylights, leaving the cabins wet and the charts scattered in the mate's cabin. About 3.5 feet of water sloshes in the hold, not enough to sink her but certainly enough to notice, and one of the ship's 2 pumps sits disassembled with pieces left nearby, as if someone stopped mid-repair. The sounding rod, a tool for measuring water in the hold, lies on the deck where someone dropped it after checking the levels. Captain Briggs's cabin tells its own story through scattered personal belongings: a sheathed sword under the bed, women's clothing draped over furniture, a child's toys left on the floor. The ship's papers are gone, along with the captain's navigation instruments, the chronometer and sextant, but the logbook remains open to that final entry from November 25th. 9 days have passed since someone wrote those words, and in that time the Mary Celeste drifted nearly 400 miles with nobody aboard. Deveau checks the cargo hold and finds 1,701 barrels of alcohol still there, though 9 of them sit empty. Later investigation reveals those 9 were made of red oak, more porous than white oak barrels, and they likely leaked during the voyage. The galley presents an orderly scene with no food prepared and no meal left half-eaten on the table, and this matters because you have probably heard that the Mary Celeste was found with warm food on the table and coffee still steaming. That never happened, and that detail comes from a fiction story written 12 years later by a young author named Arthur Conan Doyle. Back on deck, Deveau makes one more discovery that changes everything. The ship's single lifeboat is missing, and near the railing, a length of rope, the main halyard measuring about 3 inches around, hangs over the side. Some accounts say broken, others say cut, but either way it was not tied off properly. Whatever happened on this ship, whoever was aboard, they left in a hurry, grabbing the navigation instruments, the ship's papers and the lifeboat, but leaving behind 6 months of food and water, all their personal belongings, and a perfectly seaworthy ship. None of them were ever seen again. Deveau and 2 other crewmen sail the Mary Celeste to Gibraltar over the course of a week, arriving on December 13th, and what follows is a salvage hearing that drags on for 3 months. Frederick Solly Flood runs the proceedings as Attorney General of Gibraltar, and one historian described him as a man whose arrogance and pomposity were inversely proportional to his IQ. Solly Flood becomes convinced that foul play explains everything. A diver examines the hull and finds no damage, while surveyors search for signs of violence and locate a few marks on the deck, along with stains that might be blood and a sword with some kind of residue on the blade. Testing proves the stains are not blood at all, just rust and other substances, but Solly Flood develops his theory anyway. The crew got drunk on the alcohol cargo, murdered Captain Briggs and his family in a frenzy, then fled the scene, or so Solly Flood believed. One significant problem undermines this theory. The alcohol was denatured, industrial grade, and drinking it would make you violently ill or kill you outright. Solly Flood also suspects the crew of the Dei Gratia, theorizing that they encountered the Mary Celeste at sea, killed everyone aboard, and staged the scene to claim salvage money. This theory falls apart under scrutiny as well. Captain Morehouse and Captain Briggs knew each other, possibly as friends, and the Dei Gratia left 8 days after the Mary Celeste and was a slower vessel. 3 months of investigation produced no evidence of any crime, but the court remains unconvinced of the Dei Gratia's complete innocence, and the salvage award comes in at just 1/6 of the ship and cargo's value, about $1,700 out of $46,000. The mystery stays unsolved. January 1884, 12 years after the Mary Celeste drifted into history, and a 24-year-old ship's surgeon named Arthur Conan Doyle publishes a short story in Cornhill magazine. The story describes a ship called the Mary Celeste, and notice that spelling because Doyle changed it from Mary to Marie. Doyle's fiction presents a ship found in perfect condition, with lifeboats still hanging in their places and food warm on the table, as if the crew simply vanished mid-meal. The story is published anonymously, and the writing is so convincing that many readers believe they are reading a true account. The Boston Herald reprints it as a news article, which prompts Frederick Solly Flood to issue an official statement calling it a fabrication from beginning to end. None of that matters because the damage is done. Doyle's fiction becomes more famous than any fact about the actual ship, and the misspelling Mary Celeste enters common use, while the image of the ghost ship with meals still warm on the table takes permanent hold in public imagination. More stories appear over the following decades. A survivor's account published in 1913 that was completely fabricated, a confession in the 1920s that turned out to be another hoax, each one adding new details and drifting further from what actually happened. The real Mary Celeste and the actual facts of what Deveau found that day get buried beneath a century of myth. What do we actually know? The Mary Celeste was seaworthy when found. Water filled the hold, but not enough to sink her. One pump sat disassembled, possibly clogged or broken, and the sounding rod lay on deck, as if someone had just checked the water level. 9 barrels of alcohol were empty, leaked dry because red oak barrels are more porous than white oak. The lifeboat was taken, the main halyard hung over the side, broken or cut, and navigation instruments were taken along with the ship's papers, while everything else stayed behind. 2006 brings new evidence when a scientist at University College London named Dr. Andrea Sella conducts an experiment for a documentary. Sella builds a replica of the Mary Celeste's hold, fills it with paper cubes to represent barrels, introduces butane gas and ignites it, and the result is a massive flash of flame and a pressure wave strong enough to terrify anyone nearby. Here is what makes this significant. The paper cubes are completely untouched afterward, no fire damage, no scorch marks. The theory goes like this. Alcohol fumes build up in the hold, something causes a spark, and a flash of flame shoots up through the hatches with no lasting damage. But Captain Briggs, a cautious man travelling with his wife and infant daughter, makes a decision in that moment. Everyone abandons ship and gets into the lifeboat. They tie it to the Mary Celeste with the main halyard and wait at a safe distance to see if the ship will explode. The ship does not explode, and that is when the weather turns. Late November in the North Atlantic brings rising seas and picking winds, and the halyard connecting the lifeboat to the ship goes taut as the distance grows. And then it snaps, or maybe someone cuts it in panic, trying to get closer to the ship before it is too late. But either way, the Mary Celeste sails on without them. 10 people in a small lifeboat on rough December seas, hundreds of miles from land, never stood a chance. Nobody knows for certain what happened on the Mary Celeste, and we probably never will, but the facts tell us this much. 10 people boarded that ship in New York, and somewhere between November 25th and December 4th, they made a decision to get into that lifeboat and leave behind everything except what they needed to navigate. Whatever scared them, whether a flash of flame, a faulty reading on the pump, or something we will never understand, it scared them enough to abandon a perfectly good ship, and the sea took them. Back in Massachusetts, a 7-year-old boy named Arthur Briggs waited for his parents to come home, and they never did. A cenotaph in Evergreen Cemetery, Marion, Massachusetts, marks the family with no bodies underneath, just names and a date. Lost in Brig Mary Celeste, November 1872. The Mary Celeste herself sailed on for another 12 years under different owners until 1885, when her final captain deliberately wrecked her on a reef in Haiti, trying to collect insurance money, and the fraud was discovered, but the ship proved too damaged to salvage, so she rotted there on that reef until the sea finally claimed her. If you have made it this far, thank you, and there are more stories like this one. Subscribe if you want to hear them.